I did hear about Darrell Coplin, Rand said slowly. I suppose it just didn't sink in.
2 farms were attacked, Lan went on. Yours and one other. Because of Beltane, everyone who lived at the second farm was already in the village. Many people were saved because the Myrddraal was ignorant of Two Rivers customs. Festival and Winter Night made its task all but impossible, but it did not know that.
Rand looked at Moraine, leaning back in the chair. But she said nothing, only watched him, a finger laid across her lips. Our farm and who else's? He asked finally.
The Aybara farm, Lan replied. Here in Emmonsfield, they struck first at the forge and the blacksmith's house, and Master Cauthen's house.
Rand's mouth was suddenly dry. That's crazy, he managed to get out, then jumped as Moraine straightened. Not crazy, Rand, she said. Purposeful. The Trollocs did not come to Emmonsfield by happenstance, and they did not do what they did for the pleasure of killing and burning, however much that delighted them. They knew what, or rather who, they were after. The Trollocs came to kill or capture young men of a certain age who live near Emmonsfield. My age? Rand's voice shook, and he did not care. Light. Matt? What about Perrin? Alive and well, Moraine assured him, if a trifle sooty. Van Craw and them Thane?
Were never in any danger, Lan said. At least, no more than anyone else.
But they saw the rider, the Fade, too, and they're the same age as I am. Master Craw's house was not even damaged, Moraine said, and the miller and his family slept through half the attack before the noise woke them. Ban is 10 months older than you, and Lem 8 months younger. She smiled dryly at his surprise. I told you I asked questions, and I also said young men of a certain age. You and your 2 friends are within weeks of one another. It was you 3 the Myrddraal sought, and none others. Rand shifted uneasily, wishing she would not look at him like that, as if her eyes could pierce his brain and read what lay in every corner of it. What would they want with us? We're just farmers, shepherds. That is a question that has no answer in the Two Rivers, Moraine said quietly. But the answer is important. Trollocs, where they have not been seen in almost 2,000 years, tells us that much. Lots of stories tell about Trolloc raids, Rand said stubbornly. We just never had one here before. Warders fight Trollocs all the time. Lan snorted.
Boy, I expect to fight Trollocs along the Great Blight, but not here, nearly 600 leagues to the south. That was as hot a raid last night as I'd expect to see in Shinar, or any of the borderlands. In one of you, Moraine said, or all 3. There is something the Dark One fears. That's impossible. Rand stumbled to the window and stared out at the village, at the people working among the ruins. I don't care what's happened. That is just impossible. Something on the green caught his eye. He stared, then realized it was the blackened stump of the spring pole. A fine Beltane with a peddler and a gleeman, and not strangers. He shivered and shook his head violently. No, I'm a shepherd. The Dark One can't be interested in me. It took a great deal of effort, Lan said grimly, to bring so many Trollocs so far without raising a hue and cry from the borderlands to Caemlyn and beyond. I wish I knew how they did it. Do you really believe they went to all that bother just to burn a few houses? They will be back, Moraine added. Rand had his mouth open to argue with Lan, but that brought him up short. He spun to face her. Back? Can't you stop them? You did last night and you were surprised then. Now you know they are here. Perhaps, Moraine replied. I could send to Tar Valon for some of my sisters. They might have time to make the journey before we need them. The Myrddraal knows I am here too, and it probably will not attack, not openly at least, lacking reinforcements. More Myrddraal and more Trollocs. With enough Aes Sedai and enough orders, the Trollocs can be beaten off, though I cannot say how many battles it will take. A vision danced in his head of Emmonsfield all in ashes, all the farms burned, and Watch Hill and Devon Ride and Tarrant Ferry. All ashes and blood. No, he said, and felt a wrenching inside, as if he had lost his grip on something.
That's why I have to leave, isn't it? The Trollocs won't come back if I am not here.
A last trace of obstinacy made him add,
If they really are after me.
Moraine's eyebrows raised as if she were surprised that he was not convinced, but Lan said, Are you willing to bet your village on it, sheep herder? Your whole 2 rivers? Rand's stubbornness faded.
No,
he said again, and felt that emptiness inside again, too.
Perrin and Mat have to go too, don't they?
Leaving the 2 rivers. Leaving his home and his father. At least Tam would get better. At least he would be able to hear him say all that on the quarry road had been nonsense.
We could go to Baerlon, I suppose, or even Caemlyn. I've heard there are more people in Caemlyn than in the whole 2 rivers. We'd be safe there.
He tried out a laugh that sounded hollow.
I used to daydream about seeing Caemlyn. I never thought it would come about like this.
There was a long silence, then Lan said, I would not count on Caemlyn for safety. If the Myrddraal want you badly enough, they will find a way. Walls are a poor bar to a half-man, and you would be a fool not to believe they want you very badly indeed. Rand thought his spirits had sunk as low as they possibly could, but at that they slid deeper.
There is a place of safety,
Moraine said softly, and Rand's ears pricked up to listen.
In Tar Valon, you would be among Aes Sedai and warders. Even during the Trolloc Wars, the forces of the Dark One feared to attack the Shining Walls. The one attempt was their greatest defeat until the very end. And Tar Valon holds all the knowledge we Aes Sedai have gathered since the time of madness. Some fragments even date from the Age of Legends. In Tar Valon, if anywhere, you will be able to learn why the Myrddraal want you. Why the Father of Lies wants you. That I can promise.
A journey all the way to Tar Valon was almost beyond thinking. A journey to a place where he would be surrounded by Aes Sedai. Of course, Moraine had healed Tam, or it looked as if she had at least. But there were all those stories. It was uncomfortable enough to be in a room with one Aes Sedai, but to be in a city full of them? And she still had not demanded her price. There was always a price, so the stories said.
How long will my father sleep? He asked at last. I have to tell him. He shouldn't just wake and find me gone.
He thought he heard Lan give a sigh of relief. He looked at the water curiously, but Lan's face was as expressionless as ever.
It is unlikely he will wake before we depart, Moraine said. I mean to go soon after full dark. Even a single day of delay could be fatal. It will be best if you leave him a note. In the night?
Rand said doubtfully, and Lan nodded. The half-men will discover we are gone soon enough. There is no need to make things any easier for it than we must. Rand fussed with his father's blankets. It was a very long way to Tar Valon.
In that case, I'd better go find Mat and Perrin. I will attend to that.
Moraine got to her feet briskly and donned her cloak with suddenly restored vigor. She put a hand on his shoulder, and he tried very hard not to flinch. She did not press hard, but it was an iron grip that held him as surely as a forked stick held a snake.
It will be best if we keep all of this just among us. You understand? The same ones who put the dragon's fang on the inn door might make trouble if they knew. I understand.
He drew a relieved breath when she took her hand away.
I will have Mr. Salvere bring you something to eat, she went on, just as if she had not noticed his reaction. Then you need to sleep. It will be a hard journey tonight, even if you are rested.
The door closed behind them, and Rand stood looking down at Tam. Looking at Tam, but seeing nothing. Not until that very minute had he realized that Emond's Field was a part of him as much as he was a part of it. He realized it now because he knew that was what he had felt tearing loose. He was apart from the village now. The Shepherd of the Night wanted him. It was impossible. He was only a farmer. But the Trollocs had come, and Lan was right about one thing. He could not risk the village on the chance Moraine was wrong. He could not even tell anyone. The Coplans really would make trouble about something like that. He had to trust in Aes Sedai.
Don't wake him now,
Mr. Salvere said, as the mayor shut the door behind his wife and himself. The cloth-covered tray she carried gave off delicious, warm smells. She set it on the chest against the wall, then firmly moved Rand away from the bed.
Mistress Moraine told me what he needs, she said softly. And it does not include you falling on top of him from exhaustion. I've brought you a bite to eat. Don't let it get cold now.
I wish you wouldn't call her that, Bran said peevishly. Moraine Sedai is proper. She might get mad.
Mistress Alvier gave him a pat on the cheek. You just leave me to worry about that. She and I had a long talk. And keep your voice down. If you wake Tam, you'll have to answer to me and Moraine Sedai. She put an emphasis on Moraine's title that made Bran's insistence seem foolish. The two of you keep out of my way. With a fond smile for her husband, she turned to the bed and Tam. Master Alvier gave Rand a frustrated look. She's an Aes Sedai. Half the women in the village act as if she sits in the women's circle, and the rest as if she were a Trolloc. Not a one of them seems to realize you have to be careful around Aes Sedai. The men may keep looking at her sideways, but at least they aren't doing anything that might provoke her. Careful, Rand thought. It was not too late to start being careful. Master Alvier, he said slowly, do you know how many farms were attacked?
Only 2 that I've heard of so far, including your place.
The mayor paused, frowning, and shrugged.
It doesn't seem enough for what happened here. I should be glad of it, but... well, we'll probably hear of more before the day is out.
Rand sighed. No need to ask for farms. Here in the village, was there anything to show what they were after?
After, boy? I don't know that they were after anything, except maybe killing us all. It was just the way I said. The dogs barking, and Moraine Sedai and Lan running through the streets. Then somebody shouted that Master Luhan's house and the forge were on fire. Abul Cawthan's house flared up. Odd that, it's nearly in the middle of the village. Anyway, the next thing the Trollocs were all among us. No, I don't think they were after anything.
He gave an abrupt bark of a laugh and cut it short with a wary look at his wife. She did not look around from Tam.
To tell the truth, he went on more quietly, they seemed almost as confused as we were. I doubt they expected to find an Aes Sedai here, or a warder.
I suppose not, Rand said, grimacing. If Moraine had told the truth about that, she probably had told the truth about the rest, too. For a moment, he thought about asking the mayor's advice, but Master Alvier obviously knew little more about Aes Sedai than anyone else in the village. Besides, he was reluctant to tell even the mayor what was going on, what Moraine said was going on. He was not sure he was more afraid of being laughed at or being believed. He rubbed a thumb against the hilt of Tam's sword. His father had been out into the world. He must know more about Aes Sedai than the mayor did. But if Tam really had been out of the Two Rivers, then maybe what he had said in the West would. He scrubbed both his hands through his hair, scattering that line of thought.
You need sleep, lad, the mayor said.
Yes, you do, Mistress Alvier added. You're almost falling down where you stand. Rand blinked at her in surprise. He had not even realized she had left his father. He did need sleep. Just the thought set off a yawn.
You can take the bed in the next room, the mayor said. There's already a fire laid.
Rand looked at his father. Tam was still deep in sleep, and that made him yawn again. I'd rather stay in here if you don't mind, for when he wakes up. Sick room matters were in Mistress Alvier's province, and the mayor left it to her. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. But you let him wake on his own. If you bother his sleep. He tried to say he would do as she ordered, but the words got tangled in yet another yawn. She shook her head with a smile. You will be asleep yourself in no time at all. If you must stay, curl up next to the fire, and drink a little of that beef broth before you doze off. I will, Rand said. He would have agreed to anything that kept him in that room. And I won't wake him. See that you do not, Mistress Alvier told him firmly, but not in an unkindly way. I'll bring you up a pillow and some blankets. When the door finally closed behind them, Rand dragged the lone chair in the room over beside the bed and sat down where he could watch Tam. It was all very well for Mistress Alvier to talk about sleep. His jaws cracked as he stifled a yawn. But he could not sleep yet. Tam might wake at any time, and maybe only stay awake a short while. Rand had to be waiting when he did. He grimaced and twisted in the chair, absently shifting the sword hilt out of his ribs. He still felt awkward about telling anyone what Moraine had said. But this was Tam, after all.
This was... Without realizing it, he set his jaw determinedly. My father. I can tell my father anything. He twisted a little more in the chair and put his head against the chair back. Tam was his father, and nobody could tell him what to say or not say to his father. He just had to stay awake until Tam woke up. He just had to... Chapter 9. Tellings of the Wheel. Rand's heart pounded as he ran, and he stared in dismay at the barren hills surrounding him. This was not just a place where spring was late in coming. Spring had never come here, and never would come. Nothing grew in the cold soil that crunched under his boots, not so much as a bit of lightning. He scrambled past boulders twice as tall as he was. Dust coated the stone, as if never a drop of rain had touched it. The sun was a swollen, blood-red ball, more fiery than on the hottest day of summer, and bright enough to sear his eyes. But it stood dark against a leaden cauldron of a sky where clouds of sharp black and silver roiled and boiled on every horizon. For all the swirling clouds, though, no breath of breeze stirred across the land, and despite the sullen sun, the air burned cold like the depths of winter. Rand looked over his shoulder often as he ran, but he could not see his pursuers. Only desolate hills and jagged black mountains, many topped by tall plumes of dark smoke rising to join the milling clouds. If he could not see his hunters, though, he could hear them, howling behind him, guttural voices shouting with the glee of the chase, howling with the joy of blood to come. Trollocs, coming closer, and his strength was almost gone. With desperate haste, he scrambled to the top of a knife-edged ridge, then dropped to his knees with a groan. Below him, a sheer rock wall fell away, a 1,000-foot cliff plummeting into a vast canyon. Steamy mists covered the canyon floor, their thick gray surface rolling in grim waves, rolling and breaking against the cliff beneath him, but more slowly than any ocean wave had ever moved. Patches of fog glowed red for an instant, as if great fires had suddenly flared beneath it, then died. Thunder rumbled in the depths of the valley, and lightning crackled through the gray, sometimes striking up at the sky. It was not the valley itself that sapped his strength and filled the empty spaces left with helplessness. From the center of the furious vapors, a mountain thrust upward. A mountain taller than any he had ever seen in the mountains of mist. A mountain as black as the loss of all hope. That bleak stone spire, a dagger stabbing at the heavens, was the source of his desolation. He had never seen it before, but he knew it. The memory of it flashed away like quicksilver when he tried to touch it, but the memory was there. He knew it was there. Unseen fingers touched him, pulled at his arms and legs, trying to draw him to the mountain. His body twitched, ready to obey. His arms and legs stiffened, as if he thought he could dig his fingers and toes into the stone. Ghostly strings entwined around his heart, pulling him, calling him to the Spire Mountain. Tears ran down his face, and he sagged to the ground. He felt his will draining away like water out of a holed bucket. Just a little longer, and he would go where he was called. He would obey, do as he was told. Abruptly, he discovered another emotion. Anger. Push him, pull him. He was not a sheep to be prodded into a pen. The anger squeezed itself into one hard knot, and he clung to it as he would have clung to a raft in a flood. "Serve me," a voice whispered in the stillness of his mind. A familiar voice. If he listened hard enough, he was sure he would know it. "Serve me." He shook his head to try to get it out of his head. "Serve me!" He shook his fist at the Black Mountain. "The light consume you, shaitan!" Abruptly, the smell of death lay thick around him. A figure loomed over him in a cloak the color of dried blood. A figure with a face. He did not want to see the face that looked down at him. He did not want to think of that face. It hurt to think of it, turned his mind to embers. A hand reached toward him. Not caring if he fell over the edge, he threw himself away. He had to get away, far away. He fell, flailing at the air, wanting to scream, finding no breath for screaming, no breath at all. Abruptly, he was no longer in the barren land, no longer falling. Winter-brown grass flattened under his boots. It seemed like flowers. He almost laughed to see scattered trees and bushes, leafless as they were, dotting the gently rolling plain that now surrounded him. In the distance reared a single mountain,
its peak broken and split, but this mountain brought no fear or despair. It was just a mountain, though oddly out of place there, with no other in sight. A broad river flowed by the mountain, and on an island in the middle of that river was a city such as might live in a gleeman's tale, a city surrounded by high walls, gleaming white and silver beneath the warm sun. With mingled relief and joy, he started for the walls, for the safety and serenity he somehow knew he would find behind them. As he came closer, he made out soaring towers, many joined by wondrous walkways that spanned the open air. High bridges arced from both banks of the river to the island city. Even at a distance, he could see lacy stonework on those spans, seemingly too delicate to withstand the swift waters that rushed beneath them. Beyond those bridges lay safety, sanctuary. Of a sudden, a chill ran along his bones. An icy clamminess settled on his skin, and the air around him turned fetid and dank. Without looking back, he ran from the pursuer whose freezing fingers brushed his back and tugged at his cloak. Ran from the light-eating figure with the face that... He could not remember the face, except his terror. He did not want to remember the face. He ran, and the ground passed beneath his feet, rolling hill and flat plain. And he wanted to howl like a dog gone mad. The city was receding before him. The harder he ran, the further away drifted the white shining walls and haven. They grew smaller and smaller until only a pale speck remained on the horizon. The cold hand of his pursuer clutched at his collar. If those fingers touched him, he knew he would go mad, or worse, much worse. Even as that surety came to him, he tripped and fell. "No!" he screamed, and grunted as paving stones smacked the breath out of him. Wonderingly, he got to his feet. He stood on the approaches to one of the marvelous bridges he had seen rearing over the river. Smiling people walked by on either side of him. People dressed in so many colors they made him think of a field of wildflowers. Some of them spoke to him, but he could not understand, though the words sounded as if he should. But the faces were friendly, and the people gestured him onward, over the bridge with its intricate stonework, onward toward the shining, silver-streaked walls and the towers beyond, toward the safety he knew waited there. He joined the throng streaming across the bridge and into the city through massive gates set in tall, pristine walls. Within was a wonderland where the meanest structure seemed a palace. It was as though the builders had been told to take stone and brick and tile and create beauty to take the